I'm going to have to be so much clearer about the group exercise in the future. I didn't think it would be so hard for people to figure out that you didn't actually need to collaborate with your classmates to get it done, because I do understand that people are flaky, or some people have a schedule where they could have done it like you, right?
I'm in Taiwan.
Okay, what is that, 16 hours difference? Or
Yeah.
So yeah, you had probably plenty of time to do the assignment, but it's difficult to do that with other people who are on a different schedule than you, and or trying to do it ahead, or waiting till last minute at the same time when you're supposed to do part of the assignment dependent upon someone else's work. So that's just part 3. So you guys could have pretty much done everything except for part 3, which part 3 doesn't even show, like, other than your comment after, each person's thing. So did you guys read White Guilt?
Yeah.
Oh, good. What did you guys think about that one?
I definitely think it's a very sad history, and I definitely think most of this is just my assumption, but I think most of the white people now they shouldn't be responsible for what their ancestors have done, and also those ancestors did it under the circumstances that they have to do it. Not they have to do it, but like everyone is doing this. It's like a culture back then, I guess.
Well, okay. Tell me what you think here then. So, because there's an argument that, oh, well, yes, us white people shouldn't be responsible for something our parents did, but what about this? What if we are living right now off of, like my status in society is somehow based off of what my ancestors did? Like, if there is still a result from that, then is there something that I should feel we need to do? Not necessarily me in the way that I live my everyday life, but maybe if there's not a problem with the way that I'm living, but there's a problem with the way that a system is set up, because
Right.
it's set up in a way that benefits me over someone else, that there's not real equality and equity going on,
Right.
then is there something that I should feel needs to change? Because like you guys saw the example with the guy in the bathroom, right? Where the guy like hands him $20 to like, what's the point of that? How does handing the guy $20 actually help him in reality? Does that help him, or does that help the guy's conscience?
Just conscience, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it kind of cheapens the other guys. Like, if he takes the 20, then he feels like crap, especially in that situation. They'd been doing that kind of thing, but then when he started actually letting his own, like, it's one thing to get someone to give you $20 just by playing them, but it's another thing to actually let out a little bit of your frustration. Not just that, right? You saw the difference, and he talked about like the inward feelings going on there, and then it seemed like he was actually selling himself out a little bit for a measly $20 because he got angry in this scenario. I mean, it's not so much about that one incident. It's more like about the idea behind it, and how it's a metaphor potentially for the way that people, I guess, need to get by, jump through hoops, or play a game that diminishes their value or their identity value in a way.
Throughout the whole reading, he basically kept saying how, like, white people, well, you said it too, like, they're just doing it for them. Like, they're not helping the situation. They just want to get out of the awkwardness, I guess. And then how also he was saying, like, he feels like white people try to make Black people dependent on them like in certain situations, like the school thing with the money, and how he doesn't want kind of like them to like white people to feel like black people can't do it on their own
Right.
when they can.
Exactly. Or they would be able to do it on their own if they had all the same kind of stuff. Well, he gets there, right? And
Yeah.
so some of the ways that we've already tried to, he goes through the civil rights movement, and he points to things like we get to the point where he brings up affirmative action, which is one of the ways that we've tried to get people on the same level so that they can do things on their own as if they were anyone else. We don't realize how much of our success in life is based off of our network of like our family. You're an adult now. You guys are technically adults. You could vote or whatever. You can do adult things, and yet how much are you dependent on your family still?
Like a 8, 9.
An 8 or a 9 out of 10?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because
okay.
housing and like food.
Exactly. And I mean, especially now, it takes people quite a while to be able to get on their feet because of how complicated the world is. I mean, everything that you take on your own becomes another weight or chain, metaphorical chain that makes it so that you're pretty much, you know, controlled or obligated to something, right? You have to pay your bills. You've got insurance, you've got utilities, you've got overhead for your rent, living expenses, you've got grocery bills, your cell phone bill, which I don't know why I put that as separate, but I feel like that's not really a utility. But like all these different things that once that becomes your responsibility, it's a pretty big burden to be able to handle all that stuff, especially with how volatile like the job market can be. I didn't even go to college right away. Like I pretty much had to get a job. And then when I figured out that there was a way for me to work and go to school, because that was the problem. At a certain point, I couldn't even find work, at least not work that would be able to sustain me. Around like 2008, there was the recession. Everything was falling apart. And so how are you supposed to be able to survive and pay your bills or get a job that would even be enough? This is the thing. Around that time, and maybe even a little bit before that, people could get full-time jobs at places a lot easier. Now places don't really hire full-time anymore because that means that they have to give benefits. And then now they've even made it a little bit easier to get benefits. Do you know what I mean by benefits? Like insurance, medical, and things like that. And then we, of course, have added on more to our government aid. But before, you could get all that stuff through your work if you were able to work full time. But instead of that, because employers didn't want to pay that extra thing to pay into people's insurance and stuff, because that's harder to make money that way, and we're in a recession and all these excuses, it made it so that employers found this loophole around that by not actually hiring people full time, and they would just hire more. They would have to hire more employees that way. And you'll notice with a lot of jobs that you would think of getting for your first job, like coffee shop jobs and stuff like that, they hire more people than they really need, and then they get to spread the hours even thinner, and so it makes it more difficult for you to work, and then you end up being more expendable, as well as, so on their end you're more expendable. They can fire you on a whim if they want, because they've got plenty of backup to fill in your hours, people who are more than willing to take those hours and still not even be full time. And then you on your end, how are you going to pay your bills off of just one part-time job? And then you have to get multiple part-time jobs so that you can maybe scrape by with your bills, but then you have to juggle like, oh, sorry, I can't work on these days, but then your boss is demanding you, but that cuts into the other job, and life gets really complicated that way, and you're still not even able to survive. And it's it's kind of crazy because you're like, how has this world become like this? Well, okay, in your case, you didn't even know any other world than this. So there was a world before this, and there was a world before the one that I came into. I ended up going to college though and getting financial aid to do it. So that was like getting paid to go to school. I was able to somehow get through college without any college debt, which is really useful because I have a couple friends who came out of college with a business degree that they couldn't really use for anything. And they came out with 60 grand of debt. So, I mean, if you think about that, I can actually use my degree, and then I don't have all that college debt, because you can't get away from student loans. You know that, right? Like if you get a student loan, you can't file bankruptcy to get rid of that. It's stuck with you. And they're tinkering with ideas on how to get around that, but there's not really a way to get around it. You can't, like, it's stuck with you for life. And so it may seem like, oh, here's money, but if you don't have the money to spend, then you find ways. Like me and my wife, instead of taking out student loans, we lived in a warehouse for like our first 4 years of marriage. Like a warehouse with like one window and bars on it, on the window, right? And we both went to school at the same time and had part-time jobs. So we found a way to live off of less. And we actually dumpster dived a little bit too. I don't know if you know what that is. Do you guys know what dumpster diving is?
No.
Like for food or like
Yeah,
stuff?
for food. Some stores, they don't have trash compactors. So you can go into the dumpster right after they've closed. So I used to work at Smart and Final. And so one of my jobs was stocking shelves and also taking things off the shelf that were expiring. And so if it expired that day, it doesn't matter if it could last like 2 weeks or a month longer. You have to take it off the shelf by law and then put it in the dumpster. But a lot of places, they don't do that until nighttime. And so right before the shift is over too. And so at a couple stores, I won't tell you the ones in case someday I ever have to go back and dumpster dive again. But I've gone to stores where they literally pushed a cart out the back door over to the dumpster, and there was a homeless person already waiting, and instead of throwing it in the dumpster, they just pushed the cart over to the homeless person. And then of course I let the homeless person have dibs, and let them go through it and get whatever they wanted. But there's pre-made meals already there, sandwiches and stuff, yogurt, sealed yogurt containers that aren't puffy or anything like that. You don't want to get meat out of a dumpster, really. I have found filet mignon in a dumpster, and I was like, it's cold. It's still cold. The package isn't puffy. But my wife was like, no, we're not going to eat that. Because you don't know. It's safer to not. Also, eggs. Have you guys noticed that if one egg cracks in a carton, that the store, they have to throw the whole thing away? Or if they're smart, they will take one from another pack and they'll fill in all the broken eggs if they are smart. But a lot of employees will just throw the whole carton away if there's one cracked egg. So we used to get cartons and cartons of eggs. And if you live, so when I lived in China, I didn't just live in Hong Kong, but one time I was living in Hainan, which is the island off the south that's about the same size as Taiwan, but Taiwan says that they're bigger. There, we just kept the eggs on top of the fridge. They can last outside of a fridge for like a month at least, unless it's like hot weather and they're fertilized, which you typically don't eat fertilized eggs. So we would get a bunch of them out of the still cold, out of the dumpster. Yeah. So I was dumpster diving for food. We'd get organic produce like tomatoes, broccoli, and all kinds of stuff that were like in sealed packages already. And they just tossed it because the date on it. And then of course we'd come home and wash it. And then for a while we were, my wife, before we started doing that for ourselves, she was actually taking that stuff to a park. She would bring it home, clean it up, and then make spaghetti with like organic heirloom tomatoes and like all these really good ingredients. And then she'd take it to a park and feed the homeless. So that was cool. But the whole reason why I went into this was just to show, like, if you get student loans, then that's money in your hand that you're going to end up using to live in ways that maybe you don't have to live, like in excess. I knew people who were at community college still, and they were taking out 20 grand of student loans every chance they could, when they could have just lived with their parents still and been able to, like, yes, you're not living on your own yet, but you don't need to live on your own yet. Or if you, I know people, they had a baby early, but they still live with one of their, with their wife's parents or something like that. And that's not ideal, but if they're like 19 years old still, and they're still needing to go to college or to be able to like get some money together so that they can live on their own, then it's kind of smarter to do that than live what you feel like society is telling you need to do. A lot of immigrant families will live together, like 3 or 4 generations of people, like multiple families living in the same house. They'll get, I know a couple families that they live in really nice houses in Fullerton, and it's like a whole, like a really big family. And because there's so many of them, they are able to pay the rent on that. And then they're able to save enough money to go and like start their own families and buy their own houses and stuff after a couple of years. And so you think some people might look down on that, but if you think about it, they're not living in poverty, and they're able to get to a point where they can survive and work around the hardships of a system that's kind of broken, or at least not built in a way to help the people who are lower down in the economic spectrum. Does that make sense? Yeah. So going out for meals, that's another thing. We somehow got through college without, because we didn't go out for every meal, because we made all our meals. That saved so much money. Do you know how much money you spend if you go out for like 1 to 2 meals a day, or even just buy coffee out? That is so expensive. Not trying to like lecture you on this stuff. I'm trying to point to like something that kind of just like keeps people in their economic position, which if it's economic hardship, you don't want to stay in that position, but you can feel trapped and possibly be trapped in that position if the whole system's kind of like set up in a way where it only prefers people who are higher up, who are already starting higher up. And somehow that happens to typically be, in general, if you're looking on the, the race or ethnic spectrum, white people are already in a good place because they already had money. Their families had money or something like that. They are more likely to have money or a network of family members to support them. Whereas a lot of minorities don't necessarily have that footing. So in White Guilt, when we talk about affirmative action, he brings up affirmative action. Do you guys know what that is, right?
Do you know what page that's on?
The second to last one. So like this side, right around there. You guys have never heard of affirmative action? Have you heard of the idea of people being preferred for a job or to get into college or schools and things like that based off of their ethnic background? Let's say there's 2 candidates for a job or to get into a nice school, a nice college, and they both look relatively the same in their academics or in their careers, but one of them is Black and one of them is white, or one of them is Latino and white, they will prefer the minority over, right? Racial diversity in the workplace or in a school is pushed for. You guys heard of this at all? So that's what affirmative.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. The idea of affirmative action, thinking about that concept, there's racism. You guys know what racism is, yes?
Yeah.
What about systemic racism? Have you heard of that?
No.
No. Okay, so it's kind of what I was talking about earlier with the racism isn't necessarily something that the people express themselves. It is something that's built into the way that society functions. So meaning it will prefer one people group over another people group in the way that things work out. Affirmative action, what do you think that one does?
Well, like in the reading, she's saying how it's not a good thing, but is it possible that, I mean, I don't know, like, because I don't know how that would feel, but like, say that like I was Black, I wouldn't really see a problem being favored.
Right.
Like, I wouldn't feel bad for myself, but like, I wouldn't see a problem with that.
Because you would say, well, there's this other hardship where for every time, you do get something like this to help, where people are actually trying to make sure that minorities get a seat at the table or get the education that other people could just pay for, or to get a job. It's kind of trying to counteract all the other racism that I guess stops them from getting those things in other ways. That could be an argument that people would use. The thing is, I think what he says, and there's another reading that I put on Canvas that you can look at if you actually want to go further in understanding this stuff, but there's one called Place Not Race where she goes further into it, because like you already saw where I was going with that. Affirmative action in and of itself it's racist in a way, because you are literally basing it off of someone's race. It's not the kind of racist that people would say is bad, but it's still racist in that other sense. So the thing is, it's hard to pinpoint racism, like real racism in laws, because things are already set up in ways where it's not really necessarily pointed to races, it's pointed to something else. And so in that article, she goes further into what he's been talking about, where, let me ask you a question. So the Black people and the other minorities that get into college, that actually get to the point where they can get into college or get jobs because they've already gone to college, jobs that require a college degree, what do you think their upbringing was like? Like, which minorities are getting the benefit of affirmative action? Are they economically poor, or are they people who probably went to a better school to begin with? You know how like not all Black people live in the ghetto, right?
Of course.
Okay.
It's like a stereotype.
Yeah.
Every Black person lives in a ghetto, or I don't know, like large families, like I don't know, Latino families live together, or even not every white person is rich and has all those privileges.
Right.
I think affirmative action is not favorable, because like we like you said, like people in the same race could have different economic status. So if we use affirmative action based on just race, it's you could benefit people who doesn't need support, and ignore people who actually need support for economic sake.
Boom. There you go, Zach. And I think that's where Shelby Steele is going. By the way, Shelby is a dude. I don't know if you guys knew that. Very smart man. So that's what he's talking about there. The people who end up being able to utilize affirmative action, that's the problem with it, is that, like you said, Nicole, it does seem like it would be beneficial. And if you were able to take advantage of it, you wouldn't have a problem with it. You'd say, oh yeah, well, I'm cool with this. But what about by the time you are able to get into college, what would you have had to go through? When do you start college? How old are you?
About 18.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
how much of life did you have to already go through well in order to get into the kind of school where you need affirmative action to work for you? Like, you already need to have a good GPA still, and you need to be able to have all kinds of other things going for you so that you can actually apply to that college that would then work with affirmative action. So if you're a minority that already was doing well economically, then you have a better chance of that. But like, let's say all those people who do live in the ghetto, so it's not just a stereotype. Stereotypes come from somewhere. You guys tell me. You already know that there are Black communities and there are larger demographics of races together. Like, have you ever gone to Rosemead or the City of Industry? There are cities where the signs are in a different language. The majority of the signs are in a different language. You guys have seen that?
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah, there's quite a few of them. And they can do that because the majority of the population where they live is of people who speak that language as their primary language. So that's interesting. Do you know where there's a Black community in Orange County?
In Orange County? No.
No, you don't. LA County, there's some. There's some in Long Beach, Watts. Have you guys heard of Watts?
It's like Southgate, right? Is that
Yeah,
right?
close to that. But Southgate is not predominantly Black, but Watts is. Dang, I was going to ask you, do you know any white people who live in Watts? And the answer to that was going to be no. So we don't have segregation, right? Like, that was an
No, not
old.
anymore.
No,
Do,
we
do you
don't have
mean
that
the
anymore. And California never had segregation, like Jim Crow laws.
yeah? But you mean there isn't one single white person live in that city?
There may be one or two, but what I'm getting at is, how is it that we don't have segregation, or we never had segregation here, and yet somehow it kind of seems like we have everyone's living separate, and the racial diversity is not where you would think it would be. How does that happen?
Well, one way I think is that, for example, California has a lot of immigration from all other countries. So when, I don't know, a person comes, they see places that they feel familiar from, or they see people, or even signs they kind of know. So they are like, oh, maybe I should live at this place.
And you're right. You're right about that, especially when when we're still getting a larger amount of immigrants from a specific area. They typically will move near people that will speak the same language as them and have the same culture. They'll be able to buy the same groceries that they normally get, so that they can eat the meals that they know that their bodies are accustomed to, that they know how to make. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the problem comes when, what are the schools like in these areas? Think about an area where the population is predominantly white, and think about what their elementary, middle, high school, what those schools look like compared to those schools that are in areas like Watts. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's areas that have more money and there's areas that have less money. But the idea of affirmative action it seems like it's a good idea, but the thing is, by the time you are able to utilize affirmative action, it's not enough, because look at the people who are poorer, who don't have after school programs or good textbooks or technology in the classroom where they are able to grow. What happens when they live in communities where there's higher drug abuse and lower employment, where they are more obligated in their families to get jobs younger, so that children are not able to, they don't have a place where they can come home and study and do their homework and actually succeed in school, because they have so many hardships in their life, so that they're not actually able to get to the point where they can utilize affirmative action, so that they can get into a good school or get a good job with their college education. The thing that I think Shelby Steele is getting at is that it's not enough. It doesn't go far enough, because it's only the appearance of redemption. Things like that don't really get to the heart of the problem. They're only something to make people feel better. Like, look, we're doing something. You guys have affirmative action. That helps, right? Like, see, we're doing our best to get rid of systemic racism by countering it like this. That's not the case at all. It only helps those minorities that were already doing somewhat better than the rest. It comes down to, so if you read the other article that is not mandatory, it's just up there on, I think, week 8, called Place Not Race. It goes into details. Like, we didn't have Jim Crow laws, but we had sundown towns. Do you know what a sundown town is?
No.
It's where, so back in the day, they made it so that you can work there during the day, but if you have darker skin, you can't stay there past dark. Once sun goes down, you have to go somewhere else, meaning you can work here, but you can't live here. And the reason for that is you need someone to cut your lawn, or to do the packaging, or to wait your tables, you need someone to do the grunt work, the lower paid jobs, but you don't want to live with them, right? That would be ridiculous.
That's messed up.
That is messed up. Good. I'm glad you saw that. That's incredibly messed up. That's just as bad as the Jim Crow laws, but they made it in a way where it didn't seem like they had them, but they might as well. Yeah. So we had that. So what that did was, and you can look at maps, there are maps that show the racial segregation that just was because of this kind of thing. And then we still keep that kind of thing. Like, let's say the suburbs, right? As people do move out of the areas. So there's a couple things that happen. Gentrification. So white people need a little bit more room, not just white people, sorry. The higher middle class, they need more room. And so they start spreading out those borders. And so they build up an area, but they make it so that poorer people can't really survive there anymore off the rent that is now just skyrocketing. So they get pushed into other areas where they can survive. So either those areas get smaller and poorer, or they somehow find a way to get out. And when they do find ways to get out, or they start moving into other communities, let's say in the 60s or 70s, when a black person moved into a white neighborhood, what do you think the neighbors would say?
They will disagree with that decision. They will attack that person, maybe.
Yeah, the first inclination might be, well, there goes the neighborhood. Oh, now we've got a black person here. Oh, now the neighborhood's going to go to garbage, which is a horrible thing to think. But you have this thing called white flight is what ended up happening in a lot of areas. So there's the gentrification thing that's happening even now. But then there was this thing that happened, like in my area, there used to be a lot more white people. Now I can go to Costco and everyone's like, they notice me because I am like the only white person there. And so why is it that there's so few white people where I live? Because it wasn't like that before. There were a lot more. But instead of shifting, like we said, with the whole racial diversity, right? Instead of shifting towards more diversity, somehow it shifts towards less diversity. And then we get a kind of self-inflicted segregation, which, like we said, becomes a problem. It's nice when you have the same culture as the people around you. It does make sense to want to have that near you or to be in that community. But what happens when economic distribution only goes to certain areas based off of, like, it ends up hurting minorities, specifically poorer minorities? Does this make sense? So it doesn't look like, it doesn't look like the system is racist, and yet somehow it ends up being racist based off of the way that we have segregated ourselves. There's also this thing called redlining. Have you guys heard of redlining? Ah, yeah, Madison, you have heard of this. They've done this in order to change school districts and overall economic distribution so that the people who are paying into it, they make sure that the money and the resources go to their kids and their communities. And then you're like, well, who's your community? Why are you, like, what is this based off of? And you tend to see that this stuff has happened in a way where it ends up keeping the money, right? Keeping the resources with people who already have money, and then actually making sure that people who are impoverished can never really rise out of it. Yeah? What do you got, Madison?
So basically, like, what we can get from this, like, could we basically argue that we're still suffering segregation, like the effects of it from many, many years ago? And
Oh,
it's still,
totally.
like, in little ways today?
Yeah, and we're still actually doing it, right? You see less diversity than there was before, actually. You could totally write an essay just on that and see how that's an argument of fact essay. Yeah. So if that's what you're interested in, like, there's so many avenues that you can go about arguing that. I was just thinking along the way, there's at least like 5 or 8 things that popped into my head as I was trying to do this, of just directions that you could go in arguing with that stuff. You could focus on, you could
following.
Go on.
Oh, sorry.
No,
about what Madison said, I agree that we're still suffering from what segregation did, and like from older times, how there was more racism, how those classes were separated. Because I was also thinking for another reason for why we have like some cities with more of one culture than the other.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I don't know, if, let's say again in California here, we have a lot of immigration. So if an immigrant comes here and starts looking for a house and sees like a prominent white neighborhood, usually it's like expensive. It's
Right.
like a rich place. However, if they go to see like I don't know, a ghetto, like Latino neighborhood, something like that, they'll see that the houses are cheaper. So maybe they'll go like, oh, you know what? I'll go live at that place, and that place continues growing with that culture.
Right. Yeah. So it makes it, all of those factors, and you could go into that too. You would, at least address them, a little bit, saying like, there are all these factors that do make it difficult to break out of segregation, to like, because the segregation is like, it's not a law, it has to be self-inflicted now, but it happens in multiple ways, just like you're saying, Jose, and then gentrification, and then like already with systems set up so that there's just no way to be able to like move. But then the way that it goes, like you see racial inequality, but it's really based off of place. So that article has a lot of stuff that it goes into about that. If you do want to write your essay on something like this, definitely read the race not place, or sorry, place not race article that's on Canvas under week 8. It's right next to the white guilt one. It's right under it. That's a really good one to go through. She'll point you to statistics and stuff like that that you can go and find, and you should be able to find more stuff to work with in order to build that argument based off of facts. So that's a really good one on those things. But you're right, like there's so many factors that get involved, and in the meantime, right, no one wants to actually do anything that is good enough to fix it, because that's really hard. That's a lot of work. It's so much easier to do affirmative action or to like throw money at it, almost like that guy in the bathroom hands the black man $20 just to make himself feel better, you know, to get out of the situation. $20 doesn't help anything. There's like an entire system that has somehow come into play where it makes it incredibly difficult for anyone who is of a lower economic status, especially in racial groups, to actually be able to get, you know, to raise their status. So what about the concept of, oh yeah, do you have something, Madison?
Yeah, well, I was also gonna say too, like you're right. But I think a lot of big argument too, like what I hear from a lot of like I have family members that work in the government too, and it's really hard listening to them. But the biggest argument that they make is that, well, how come they have all these programs for lower income communities and for people that have less than, and so why can't they benefit from these programs? Like that's what they're there for. And I think it's really difficult for people to quite like understand that really, like, I feel like sometimes the system almost wants you to like fail. Like it you're right. It makes it really, really hard to kind of break that glass ceiling in a way.
Right. And it's very difficult to pinpoint how it's trying to make you fail. Like it almost seems deliberate. And yet, okay, so here's an example I use. By the way, I'm really glad you brought that up, because like I think I was going to move on to something else, and that was a point that we definitely needed to hit. So I have a curb that was just re-poured on my corner. I have a corner house, and so the curb for the crosswalk and everything, it's they re-poured it a year ago. It was perfectly fine before that. There was nothing wrong with the curb, but they took the time out and they re-poured it. Why did they do that? Well, because cities get they get a certain budget for different aspects of things that need to be done, and if they don't use up that budget, then they don't get as much money next year. So if they have a surplus by the end and they have to show that they have a surplus, that means that they obviously didn't need that much money, and so that money goes to other resources or to other things. We have tons of potholes in my city. We have all kinds of things that do need to be fixed streetwise. And yet they decided to re-pour our curb that was completely like fine. There was not even a chip off of it. Why did they do that? Because they don't actually know what we need. They don't care enough to know what we need in our city, because the people who are in the positions of power, they don't live here. We had the interim mayor for my city. He actually lived in the house next door neighbor for about like 5 years. He didn't really live there. Their trash cans were out like for most of the week. They would set them out and then they weren't there to bring them in. So he rented the house because he was supposed to live in the city, but he didn't live in this city because he really didn't care about the city. He just cared about having that job. You get what I mean? Like public officials politicians, they only want you to think that they care, but no one really cares enough to actually figure out what the problems are. And this goes back to the concept of white guilt. It looks like redemption. It looks like they're trying to get redemption with affirmative action and laws like that, but different programs, but it's only the appearance of redemption. It's not enough to actually make redemption happen. It's enough to make them feel better about themselves. The guilt, right? It's not enough to fix things, because that means you actually need to understand what is wrong, like the things that are truly going wrong. And no one's doing that, even on a level of city government. Like, you think that doesn't happen in like our federal government? Like, it just goes on a bigger scale. They do things, they put systems into play to make themselves look good, so that they can get reelected, so that they can put on a performance and say, look at all the things we're doing to help, these programs that we're putting forward. But the programs are not done in the way that they need to be done, or the entire system like overhaul. Like, no one wants to do a whole overhaul of things, or figure out how to help people where they really need it. Like with affirmative action specifically, do kids actually get so those kids who really need that kind of help for college, do they need it once they get to college, or do they need it much earlier? Like, look at all the things that you needed for your environment, for your school, that in order to succeed in education, you needed proper facilities at school and proper learning tools, like textbooks, current textbooks, classrooms that were like comfortable, a place where you could focus. But you didn't just need it there, you also need it at home or after school, or there needs to be so much more. The whole point is of affirmative action is like handing someone $20 in the bathroom. Like, it is not even close to being what is needed. You need help from the beginning of your education, like, which is not college. And no one really wants to go that far, because that means the system needs a full overhaul. And the problem is, right, so redlining, the changing districts so that money goes into the rich people's schools and not other places. It does make sense that, well, why would your taxes go to someone else? Someone else's good, right? Shouldn't it be spent on your stuff? That's the hard thing, though. How will people ever get out of their place? So there's this balance, or there's this this cost effectiveness, where people really need to weigh the cost. Like, so at what cost does your kid get everything that they need? And do they need all that stuff? Do they all need iPads? Because if your kids all get iPads, if all that funding goes to you guys, when there's this school over here that doesn't even have like air conditioning in their classroom on hot days, like, how does that even, you know how hard it is to concentrate when you're like sweating in like 90, 100-degree weather? Just some examples of things to think about. I don't know. What else do you guys have to say about that?
I think the problem is definitely in the system, because especially because I think I read this article that the 1% rich people, or people who have the power, is creating this ceiling, preventing lower class people or middle class people from getting up to have the resources to basically they don't want their resources or wealth to be distributed to lower class people. So I think I think if we want to change anything, um, to be for everyone to be more equal, we definitely have to change the whole system. Yeah.
Right. Well, and so that's where you could take it in essay 4 to going into a policy argument. At first, in this essay, you're just arguing that it is, here's a problem, right? This is still a thing that we deal with. Then you could build off of those ideas and say what we would really need to do about that. So like when you get into, well, is it the economic system? Can we remain capitalist with it, or do we have to go communist? You know, there's the problem is with every system, they all fail in some way. And the problem, what do you guys know what the main factor is that huh?
Greed.
Yeah, which comes from who?
Not sure.
Okay, it's humans. We're the main factor involved in every system. There's never been a communist government that succeeded. Communism doesn't work because people have to be in it, and people are greedy, like you said, Madison. So it doesn't matter. Like the more power you give to people that are higher up, the people who would be controlling that system, the higher chances of like, the more power any one person gets, the more they are going to use that unwisely or selfishly, greedy, because they have the ability to do it. And so, yeah, capitalism doesn't seem like it's working either, but is it the best option despite the greed of humans?
One thing that people who believe in communism and socialism say is that it has never been done properly, like the way it's supposed to be done. For example, in Cuba or Venezuela, those countries haven't done communism the way it's supposed to be done. So that's why it is like that.
Oh, no, totally. You're right. So let me put that in there too. Like, all right, so I just said there has never been a communist government that would work, but ideally, yes, of course, communism in its ideal form would totally work. Every form of government in its ideal form would work. A monarchy in its ideal form would work, where a king or emperor were to distribute things equally and the king would live like the people. That's an ideal form of monarchy. Have we ever seen one of those? That's rhetorical. No, we haven't. That's the problem, because practically played out, it doesn't ever work. Yeah, Venezuela is a mess. Yeah, so that's when we get to essay 4, don't focus so much on, don't even touch on policy really for this essay, but be thinking about that stuff, because it's going to come back in essay 4, where you may make an argument about that kind of thing. And you don't have to go too far with it, because that's really unfair to make you guys, you're not like PhDs on economics or anything like that. So I'm not expecting you guys to write from an authoritative standpoint or with the ability to even know how to like fix our problems when all the people before you haven't been able to fix them. So we'll talk more about that later. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting things. See how it really just segues into that topic of policy though? Just to finish off this section, we're going to look at the song This Is America. And you should put this in your RLD notes. So there's the instructions right here. You probably should watch the music video, but also read the lyrics. Here's the free write. So then there's the lyrics. See, it's hard to get it all on the screen. It might be pretty small, but read the lyrics, watch the video, and focus more on the lyrics when you're writing about it. But if there's something in the music video that actually weighs in on something in the lyrics, you can write about that. So yeah, I'd say just spend like 5-15 minutes on that. So in the song This Is America, what is Donald Glover saying in the lyrics? or what's something significant at least that piqued your interest with what we're talking about here?
Okay, so for me, in one part, well, it's almost at the end. Well, it's the end basically. It says, you just a black man in this world, you just a barcode, and then you just a black man in this world driving expensive foreigns. That part, the driving expensive foreign, you know, people not from this place, is like you're just a black person, and you just like drive people who are richer than you, like from other countries. Like, I don't know,
Okay.
stereotypes also.
All right.
In addition to that same stanza, I don't know how to call it. It says, you just a big dog. No, probably ain't life to a dog for a big dog. That's referring to how some people call themselves like, oh, I'm the big dog or something like that. And he's saying like, oh, this is not the life to a dog for a big dog. Like, oh, like that's not the proper life for people who call themselves like that.
Okay. I see what you're saying there. Let's see. Oh, that was a little off. Yeah. Well, you didn't take so yeah, big dog. That could be referred to it. There's so do you guys know the term double entendre? So it means
I do not.
okay, so there's like two possible meanings there. It could be, yeah, you're a big dog, you know, like kind of talking about, you know, masculinity or authority in a way, like by power, you're a powerful person. But then what else can a dog, you know, especially in reference to, what is he talking about? Being kennelled? Being caged?
Yeah, that part I didn't really knew how to like process it or to define it, so I didn't touch a lot on that part.
Yeah, well, let's think about it a little bit. So you are, sorry, I'm trying to look around my camera and it kind of, it's weird. I'm like, so yeah, right here we've got, oh yeah, that's from the bridge. So yeah, he ends the song with, you just a black man in this world, you just a barcode, you just a black man in this world driving expensive foreigns, you just a big dog, yeah, I kennelled him in the backyard. No proper life to a dog for a big dog. And that's interesting. So in the backyard, or proper life, just think about the metaphor for the dog, like you were talking about a little bit. Does anyone live in an apartment, and can they imagine having one of those really big dogs in that apartment? Like how difficult it would be to have like a German Shepherd or a Rottweiler or a Bernese Mountain
Hard.
Dog. Yeah, it would be difficult to have that kind of dog in your house or in an apartment without a yard or anything like that. Or maybe you have a nice house and you don't want the dog to wreck your house, so you keep them in the backyard. You keep them in an area where you can still use them or work them. Big dogs are typically, they were bred for working. We don't really do that with dogs anymore. I mean, there's police dogs and stuff like that. But with those dogs used to be used for shepherding or for guarding or for a lot of different work. And so when they don't get worked, they rip up your shoes and they trash your house because they need something to do. And and you're not running them necessarily, and you're not giving them a good life. Well, I mean, there's nothing left to do, I guess, with that kind of dog. If you can't work them anymore, you just got to keep them kenneled up in the backyard because you don't want them to break your stuff. That's if you try to now take that metaphor and apply it back to a Black man in our society, that's interesting. Also, is there anything related with that to driving expensive cars? And yeah, driving expensive foreigns. Did anyone notice in the video also? Let's look at the video really quick. You can see that, yeah?
Yeah. Is it
So,
something related to maybe slavery?
sure, yeah, there's something there. I mean, but you can't have slavery anymore, really. So he's running through the hall here. But what about these expensive foreigns? Did you guys see the expensive foreigns in the music video? I mean, these aren't expensive foreigns, are they?
No, they are regular old cars.
Yeah, I mean they are.
Oh, so
I
when
guess they're foreigns, but
when they say when Childish Gambino said expensive foreigns, it was referring to cars, not like driving people.
no,
Like,
yeah, he's talking about
oh, okay.
the same stuff in the song where yeah, here's Nicole, did you see anything like that? Like in the song, things that would refer back to that kind of stuff? Anything else? Either of you guys? How about here? I'm so fitted. I'm on Gucci. I'm so pretty. A lot of stuff about or money, right? We just want the money and party, things like that. Were you guys thinking about that at all?
Yeah. So we're 3 people here.
Yeah. I don't know where Fred is. He kind of
So another
disappeared.
part that I wanted to point out is the haunted bands.
Yeah.
So a band, I believe they're referring to money,
Yes.
and haunted is like 100, but like saying it differently.
Yeah, he's saying like bands of, so when you have $100 bills in a band, that would typically be referencing that, well, you either have a roll of hundreds or you have, like in the briefcases in the movies where they have $100 bills in stacks. That's a lot. That's
A lot of money.
yeah, that's at least what, 10 grand, I guess, in a stack.
And then he's saying contraband, which is like trade of illegal things, I believe.
Right. And then Oaxaca, right. So talking
And
about,
then Oaxaca, which is like drug things,
yeah,
and then
exactly.
they're gonna find you like Bloca. Maybe well, in my perspective, I thought Bloca was like maybe the sound of a gun or something like that.
Right. No, you're right. And he does that in the music video. Yeah. And to, I guess, give if there was any kind of doubt in your mind what he was referencing. Yeah, so what I'm wondering is if he talks about being locked up in a kennel in a backyard, what does this kennel look like? Is this a literal kennel? He's not a literal dog. So what could he be referring to the kennel as being?
jail.
Could be. It could be jail. The end kennel could be jail. But is there anything that cages you metaphorically also along the
No,
way?
like we were saying, like ghettos or the part where you live, like sometimes you're just confined to live in that place.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. So, well, okay, that does work too. You know what ghettos were originally? So we get the term originally. So this goes back to England. We really don't have to go too far into this, but just to let you guys know, the concept of a ghetto was a place to keep people at night. So like the idea we just talked about sundown towns. Well, really quick here, because so we talked about sundown towns and how people weren't allowed to stay in a certain place when nightfall came. So there was this issue, the concept of lending money in the Christian world was looked down upon. We're talking like hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So what happened was, so first of all, there was anti-Semitism. And so Jews were not allowed in certain countries, like England. No Jews were allowed until they realized that they needed, they called it usury back then, which is loaning money, like the banking systems. So for Christians, you're not supposed to loan money. It's looked down upon because if someone asks you for something, you're supposed to give it to them. But because people are greedy bastards, instead of giving freely, they would not, they would just say they didn't have anything. And so there was this huge issue with people not being able to pay for things. And they realized there was this area where they needed usury, they needed banking. And the one people group who found a justification for it, the Old Testament doesn't have a justification for loaning money, but there is a verse in there that says don't loan money at all, but then there's another verse that says don't loan money to your countrymen. And so they ignored the other verse and they just said, well, that means we can loan money to people who aren't our countrymen, to people who aren't our people. And so they found a loophole in their religion where they made it so they could loan money, and then they had a way in because Jews were hated for a very long time. Many times throughout the centuries. It wasn't just the Holocaust or Egypt with the slavery. They were ostracized and kicked out of areas a lot. And so in England, that no Jews were allowed for a long time until they realized that they needed banking. And so Jews were allowed in, but they would keep them in areas called ghettos, where they would literally lock the gate at night so that the Jews couldn't get out and like do dangerous Jew things. Like if you look at some of the plays from back in the day, their forms of entertainment, that was all they had. If you look at some of them, like The Jew of Malta or Merchant of Venice, which was Shakespeare, you will see that Jews were not looked fondly on. They were always looked on like villains, like someone who would come into your house and eat your babies at night, like a witch or something weird like that. I know this doesn't sound like it applies, but it totally does. Now think about how we have ghettos now, and even just how we've labeled them as ghettos. It's almost like a place to keep the people that you don't want to damage your way of life or possibly endanger it. Does that make sense? So we have, yeah, you're right, Jose.
Even the Jew thing that you mentioned is also segregating, like racism and all those things. And actually that's a term that it's nice to see the history of how it came up, because one would associate ghettos with only people of Black ethnicities, but in reality, no, like it was actually for Jewish people. So
yeah,
that's interesting
too. They did that in other countries too, but but yeah, it was it's interesting, like the whole Merchant of Venice that actually is taking place in Venice, which is Italy, because Jews were still not allowed in England at that point. I think when Shakespeare was writing that, or if they were, Italy and all kinds of other places were had these things going on, but you see the same tactics being used through the centuries to keep people in a place. And then when they are able to elevate their position, like when banking systems were actually working for them and they were able to, or I mean, what kind of things do you think you have to even do to come up, to be able to raise your status economically? It seems like you have to be a pretty shrewd businessman. And instead of being like, well, obviously you would have to do that, they ended up getting resented for it. And so that happens anywhere too, with any people group who struggles and works as hard as they can, fingers to the bone, just to be able to have a life like everyone else. They end up getting ridiculed. Hey, you're taking our jobs. Would you? So I mow my own lawn. I keep my own yard up. It does not look pretty. I mow weeds, or I use a weed whacker on them. It is ugly. I have the ugliest yard in my neighborhood. But a lot of people who complain about other people taking their jobs, I think it's interesting when they say that. It makes me wonder first, would you do that job that you think someone else is taking from you? Would you really do that job? Or do you just want an excuse for why you don't have a job?
Yeah, that part of how people like get angry over like immigrants or whatever taking their jobs, that's like a big thing. How like you're complaining about it, but you would never do that. You wouldn't want to do the labor. Like you wouldn't want to be like underpaid, or you just wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
It's weird. Because I think it was yesterday, I forgot where, that there was like kind of like a protest. There was like construction workers, I don't know where, and people were like yelling at them that they're taking their jobs, and I just don't understand like what they think in their head. Like it just doesn't make sense to me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. It's still going on, right? That wasn't just it comes in waves. You think that, oh, we haven't had that for years, but in reality, no, it happens often. It's still happening. And depending on where you live in the country, I mean, it could be an everyday occurrence. There's racism, there's all kinds of inequalities happening all around us, in other places where you may think because of where you live, that doesn't happen anymore. But in reality, like even the concept of slavery, even though slavery was abolished, like in the 1800s, there were still people living like slaves in the South. There's documentaries all on it where people were literally living exactly like slavery until this, like in the 60s. Like, how is that a thing? And yet it really took place. There's people like interviews with them because TV was even around at that point. And they don't even realize, because they were trapped in this cultural bubble where they didn't realize what was going on with the rest of the country so much, because we like to think that information is disseminated equally, and now it may be the case that you can find things if you know where to look, especially with the internet. But back in the day when everything was just word of mouth and you could choose to share that information or not, and some people just never learned to read, even things like that. There's a lot of crippling factors that made it so that information was not disseminated equally. And that's also another dangerous or a way of keeping people under control is a lack of knowledge and limiting knowledge, limiting information. Yeah, that's crazy. I can't believe that's still, how is that still an argument? Because you're right, Nicole, the idea of, so it goes both ways, right? It's the meaning, it's not just that you're complaining about them taking your job. It's also the boss, the corporation, or the whatever company it is that is choosing to hire these people, which these people are people who are from some, whatever their circumstances are, it is, they are willing to work for these wages that anyone else wouldn't be willing to work for. And so it comes down to the company also. Like, the company is guilty because they are specifically targeting people who are at such a desperate state that they know, or that a company knows that they can get people to do hard labor for extremely low, unfair wages in dangerous situations. Like, if you've seen like the meat industry and all kinds of issues there with how every once in a while they get in trouble for it, instead of being consistently regulated on how on health codes and even just working environments, OSHA and everything like that. Why aren't they constantly being kept in check? It's interesting. It's almost like not even just the corporations or the companies themselves, but also on top of that, government agencies are turning a blind eye to situations.
I feel that they know that they could get away with it because people are desperate for jobs. So it's like they're going to take what they can get. That's why I don't understand why people say, like, oh, they're coming over here and they're taking our jobs, when they're not. They're taking jobs that are available that nobody's doing. So it's like, I don't get why people complain about it when it's like it's working for everybody. Like, the people that are working are benefiting from it. They're able to like support their families, and like it's like labor that nobody else is going to do.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. But see, so this is the way, this is an interesting element to look at with that. If you take it further up, if you look at how all of that plays out, right, in the corporations and the government agencies turning a blind eye, or it, whatever they're doing and not getting in trouble for, or if they even get in trouble, it's like a slap on the wrist. So you think, like a lot of polluting that happens in industry, the polluting is worth it for them, because even if they get in trouble for the polluting, the penalty that they get from the government is not enough for them to stop polluting. It's not enough for them to change the way that they do business. And so they'll keep polluting and they'll keep paying the penalties because they're still making money. They're still able to get away with everything. So that becomes problematic. And you see, like, on a policy level where things need to change. But obviously with this essay, you're just focusing on what is happening and making an argument of fact about that, not how it's wrong or how it needs to change. The wrong will be implied if you were just going into it. Like, you say this is a problem, and then that can still be an argument of fact, because then you can point out how it is problematic or how it's a problem without going into the moral component of it. It's just proving it, and then that just kind of sets groundwork for you if you want to take that further in the fourth essay. So a lot of stuff going on there. I want to ask you guys what you think about, because that's one way to cage people, to keep people in a cage, like we're seeing here in the song. In the song, what do you see that may be alluding to another cage that's going on here? Are there any other cages in society that people get trapped by?
Like the gun violence. He says like, "This is America. There's guns in my area," and then how he has to carry one with him.
Okay. Why does he
But then,
have to
like,
do that, do you think?
I feel like for safety and just because it's going on. But then he kind of makes it seem like he's just saying like, okay, like this is how it is, and this is what I have to do.
Mm-hmm. Guns in my area. I got the strap. I got to carry them. Well, yeah, let's look at that really quick. Guns in my area. I got the strap. I got to carry them.
And like, there's school kids in the background.
Yeah.
Kind of weird. Like the gun violence with that too.
Uh-huh. Well, let's think about this. So if there's guns in your area, it only makes sense that you would also need a gun for protection. But he says, so I've got the strap. You're already saying that you have a gun and it's related to you are strapped, right? You carry the gun. If he then goes on and says, I've got the strap, I've got to carry him, doesn't that kind of sound redundant? Like, why, of course, you've got to carry him. Well, is there anything else that he could be referring to carrying?
Like protecting his, I don't want to say society, but like,
No, look at the kids in the background. Who's he got to protect?
yeah, like he has to fight to kind of like it's still a problem, and he has to like carry him,
Yeah,
yeah, he has to be the one, like he has to be a protector
yeah. No,
in
you're
that.
right. At the very least, that's the mentality or the idea that starts you in that direction. That's one of the ideas, or one of the even excuses that you need to justify carrying a gun. Now, does you carrying a gun actually help anything? Like, typically in that scenario, if you live in the ghetto and you carry a gun, are you going to be protecting anyone?
No.
No,
But
probably
I
not.
feel like he's trying to just make people aware.
Right. Well, so that's there's this like mentality or ideology that comes in. You live in a dangerous area. You see bad things happen. There's people over here, your own people, right? There's tribalism that ends up happening. Remember 21 Savage, the whole Bloods and Crips idea. Now he says he hangs out with Crips too, but the idea that there are definitely gangs. Near me, there's several gangs, and they are at odds. There's this idea that you have to protect your people, right, your group, from certain things, and you see all this stuff going on in the background. Meanwhile, there's like 5 or 6 kids who are dressed nicely. They go to a school, right? It's almost like the black kids that do get the education, that do maybe they're in the front grounds, right? They're the kids that see, look at what we're doing. Look at how we're fixing society, or we're helping the minorities. They're almost like the token kids who do go through the system. See, the system works. We've got these 6 kids to show you in the foreground to let you know that that we're working on making the system better. Meanwhile, there's all this junk going on in the background, and it just keeps escalating and getting worse. Meanwhile, the kids are happy, they're smiling, they're dancing for you, they're letting you know that they're thankful that society is working for them, maybe. Or maybe they could represent just a bunch of different stuff, you know but no matter what, like, this is what society wants to see. They want to see you like this, and if you don't look like this, with your shirt tucked in and a belt on, if you can't put on the image of fitting in like an upper class white person, then they're going to maybe look at you differently and treat you differently. It's almost like you have to become a white person talk like a white person. There's a lot going here. What is he concerned with, I guess, or what is he saying is the majority concern? So this, right? The gun, I gotta carry them, right? This leads to gorilla and get the bag or the pad. Goes into like pretty much like you become a drug dealer and then eventually, to get what you want, right? Once you get all this stuff, then you're able to be Gucci and fitted and pretty and stuff like that. Do you see how the trajectory goes? And then eventually, becoming a drug dealer gets dangerous, and then you get so very few avenues for success, right? You can either be a rapper, a ball player, or a drug dealer. Are those really the only ways that you can, if those are the only career paths for you in life, or at least that's what everyone tells you are the only career paths for you in life, that sounds pretty bleak. It sounds like the lottery or extreme danger. That could be some of it.
The part that says
Uh-huh.
dance and shake the frame, is that like the frame, like they're trapped or something like that?
So a frame is really interesting. You take pictures, and whatever is in the picture is in the frame. Have you ever gone on a hike in nature and you took a picture, or you tried to take a picture and you made sure that people weren't in the picture, or maybe a telephone pole or telephone wires weren't in the picture because you wanted it to look a certain way? You wanted it to actually look like nature?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you take a picture and you frame it, you're trying to present, this is reality, or this is an image I want you to see. But the fact is that that's not reality. Reality is not just what is in that frame, but what is outside of that frame. The frame is what you want to look at. The frame is what people want to see. But there's all this other stuff that you're trying to keep out of the frame, or someone is trying to keep out of the frame, because they don't want reality. They want something they want something else. And they want that other thing to be reality. They want to live in a delusion. And so, yes, this all, I know I'm just talking about taking pictures, but that this kind of like thought subliminally, right, deep in your subconscious, it's kind of, that's how pictures work. Pictures are always a lie. They're not all of reality. They're not the real thing that's going on. It's you took a picture and you cut out your laundry basket, or the trash on the ground, or whatever isn't that you didn't want in the shot because it's ugly, and you don't want people to know that you're messy, or that whatever else is going on. It's so there's reasons for that stuff, but the whole concept here of shaking the frame, it's budging it, right? Like you are shaking the frame so that you can possibly see what's outside of the frame, to see reality. What do you think, Jose?
Okay, now I can like see it better, because the frame I was thinking more not like a picture frame, or just like a frame in general. So like something that it's around another thing. So I was thinking maybe dance and like shake that thing that it's around you. But now that you mention it, like a picture, like see more than what the frame is showing you.
But what
that
you
makes
said,
more sense.
Yeah, no. What you said totally works too, though. Like it's still symbolism of something that's kind of got you trapped. You're trapped in this frame a little bit. This is how you have to act. But if you can budget a little bit, maybe you can expand the frame, or you can change whatever is going on, I guess. The other thing real quick, because I know there's still, we want to deal with the assignment and essay too, and do a little bit of brainstorming with that. I do want to touch on one last thing, that the idea of consumerism here. Do you see it? Or success having to do with commodities? I think he's not just pointing. So in the music video, you see people getting shot, you see police, and that's all the stuff that social commentaries really talk about with this, but they don't look at how he's also pointing to something else, right? People using their phone to take pictures of themselves. He says, this is Selly, that's a tool, right? Is it a tool so that you can make people see what you want them to see, which is you looking pretty or Gucci or fitted? If you are trapped in this idea that success and happiness is based off of material goods, then you will always stay trapped in this cage, this invisible cage, which is spend your money on these things so that you never raise yourself economically out of that situation. So long as you can look like you're successful, that you can look like you're not in that situation, then that's just as good. And then we can keep you in that place. So I know that sounds like diabolical and sinister and kind of like there's a conspiracy theory floating around there. Like, who's they? Who's we, right? But there's a very, you can't say that people, that lower income people aren't trapped in the idea of they see what's on Instagram, they see what people are doing on TV, what success looks like, and their first inclination or what ends up happening is they end up spending their money in a way that gets some of those things, or at least the image of those things, but not the real thing itself. And so they end up getting trapped in that. And then you stay on that, remember, the treadmill of consumption, where you're not going anywhere. You think you're going somewhere, but you're not. And so the idea of keeping people busy with that and looking at themselves being pretty, this is a tool. Turn the camera around and take video footage when you see injustice, when you see something going on that shouldn't go on. This is a tool. You can use this to turn it around. And so instead of looking at the kids dancing, look at all the shit that's going on in the background, where things are burning and people are dying in the streets, and there's racial injustice, there's horrible things happening. Turn the camera around and use it, right? Like, if everyone is able to see what's going on and understand what's going on, maybe we can do something about it, is possibly what he's talking about here. What do you guys think? Do you see it? Do you see it in the lyrics at all?
Yeah.
What did you guys think about that line? America, I just checked my followers or my following list, and you owe me. Who did that sound like to you? I kind of think it sounded like Kanye, actually.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It
He went
does,
crazy
right?
for a time.
Like this, the idea of fame as replacing fame and the image, right? Like getting people to like you or think you're great, rather than just, it's a trap. It ends up being a trap where you care so much more about looks rather than actually being able to get those things. What are the things that we're supposed to have? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Or property. It was supposed to be property, but then they changed it because happiness is something that you can't really define, and it's easy. No one needs to hand it to you, right? You can't be obligated to give someone happiness. If property was the thing, then people would be obligated, or the government would be obligated to make sure everyone had property, and that's not a thing that they would want to do. So yeah, that's there's a lot going on there, and you could take that in so many directions for an argument of fact essay. You could go into, I mean, how many things did we just talk about just in this one song? that could be an entire claim of fact argument. And same thing with the other reading. So there's all kinds of stuff that you could go off on with race and stuff, and you don't have to, you could go into a defund the police or anything like that kind of argument in your fourth essay. But yeah, that's not something you would cover here. There's plenty of other things though that you could cover just to prove something that is wrong or still happening or whatever, and then imply that it shouldn't be, and then without even saying it. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Okay, cool.